All right, morning, afternoon, or evening. We will continue on with part two. R.D. Winne, Captain and Mining Engineer, USA. The number two girl in the Queen contest was a Chinese Miesta. Throughout the islands up to coming of the Japanese traders in the past 3 or 4 years, the Chinese control the retail trade. Also, there are a great many Chinese wholesale houses in business. The Washington Grocery Manila is said to be the best and largest grocery house in the Philippines. Both wholesale and retail is Chinese owned and operated. The Chinese grocery stores handle, or rather did handle, most American goods, which is said in their favor as against the Japanese merchants who naturally tend to handle goods made in Japan. Even a Filipino finds it difficult to compete against Chinese in the retail trade. Throughout the islands, I venture to say a very large percentage of the Philippine retail trade might be called "cavato trade." That is, the goods sold are handled over the counter in amounts less than 5 cavatos. I have often watched a Chinese clerk sell perhaps 3 or 4 different articles, each article amounting to a cavato or two, half a US cent. A man may come in and buy a cent's worth of cigarettes, a cavato's worth of kerosene, a penny box of matches, and 2 cavatos worth of fish, etc. The Chinese clerk is always willing to make the sale. The Chinese trader will split any package, whatever its size, to make a sale, amounting to a cavato or two, which explains why I've only seen one retail grocery store operated by a man who claims to be an American citizen and is a German Jew, who spent a few years in the USA, coming out of the army before 1900. Even the Filipinos balk at that kind of trade. Throughout the islands there are many small retail stores called tiendas or sari-sari stores. In fact, many of the barrios that there are so many have them, one wonders who they sell to. Somewhat like in the community where the people live by taking in each other's washing, many of the sari-sari stores are operated by Filipino women. The woman of the house opens a store, and a side issue of her total stock is a constant, perhaps a few packages of matches, a few canned sardines, small bunches of bananas, 1 cavato each, and a quart of kerosene, etc., etc. All of this was bought from a Chinese who no doubt owned the largest store in the barrio. All of these stores must be licensed and recorded and made each and every sale. The store is taxed for the license, and another sales tax is collected quarterly. A large part of the retail business, though, throughout the islands is conducted along those lines, and all pay tribute indirectly to a Chinese wholesaler in Manila. Every store I noted in Cabago was operated by a Chinese, and many of the stores are 30 or more years old. The Chinese trader buys the rice crop of a Filipino farmer, generally mortgaging far in advance, that sells back the same farmer the ganta (unit of rice measurement), or two at a time, for the farmer to feed himself and his family. The Chinese grow most of the market trucks sold here. It is difficult to get the best of them in a trade. Sunday morning I walked to the top of the hill overlooking the town of Cambago and the governor's house located there, with the constabulary barracks, hospital, etc., at a lower elevation. Later I went out to the house of Mr. and Mrs. Stumbach, the school superintendent, at 12 o'clock. Douglas and I boarded a launch 4-hour ride to the coast of Mombang. Not a bad trip. We arrived there about 4 o'clock and ran into a bunch of old Spanish War pensos who live in a part of that country. They were all celebrating the Sunday together in a little barrio of Melbang. One of them, Mac, the name given to us in a meal of fried fish, bread, butter, coffee, and bananas, and seldom have I had chow that tasted any better. The fish were taken from salt water the same morning, about 8 inches long, cleaned and fried in deep fat. Douglas and I must have eaten 12 or 14 each before we called it quits. Then had coffee, bananas, etc., to wind up the meal. Douglas is interested in cocoa nut plantation there. About 12 years ago, he, with 3 others, grub-sacked one of the group to start a plantation. They took up the land and cleared it and planted the trees. The 3 partners continued working. The other, an ex-soldier, regular army, stayed on the ground and ran the show. Now they have about 30,000 trees bearing fruit, and last year Douglas' share paid him 10%. For several years, however, there was not a market for the copra. With the price prevailing at present, they should do well. We drove out there and spent Sunday night. The planter was a little worse for wear after a Sunday celebration, but his Moro wife fixed us up a fine chow. which, due to the heavy fish dinner which we had at Melnbeg, we could not enjoy. Much to the disappointment of the Morrow girl, I went to bed early. The next morning we had a fine breakfast, to the efforts of the wife again, and after droving to Melbank, said good-bye to the old-timers and started forth to the drive to Guernsey, a barrow at the foot or head of Lake Lano. We went through some of the beautiful country, fine farming land, all Morrow owned, and from the looks of the country we might have been going through an Irish hill section in the old lolly rolling hills, a large lake, bamboo fences all around the fields, hardwood forest in patches, clumps of bamboo, which somehow looked out of place, grazing cattle, wooden house slabs, etc. Nothing like the tropical scenery familiar with the lowlands. Saturday night there was a Moro killing just outside Mulbang, an affaire de famille. The husband killed the man and almost killed the woman. Then come in and reported to the constabulary. I noticed the soldiers all armed leave just before we did. A mile or two outside of Mulbang, we met the gang of Moros, all heavily armed, with their meat axes, bolarongs, and bolos. They were bringing the remains of the man and the still living woman. A rather tough-looking outfit. We stopped, and I took a picture of the woman on the stretcher. She was wrapped in a bright-colored cloth, like I sent home. The chauffeur would not let me go ahead or back to snap of the bearers carrying the dead man. Douglas had left his Vinta, a Moro boat equipped with outriggers and a Johnson outboard motor, at Guesses. He started on his trip. We planned to go to a station at Labac, the government farm school, about 1¼ hour from the lake. The following day he would take me to Dagan, at the other end of the lake. We loaded our stuff, including a sack of sea fish, in the Vienta and shoved out. However, he could not start the motor. A stiff wind came up. Finally got kick, and in about 8 hours' time the motor turned over when we started out. The motor bucked and stopped again, and the lake got rougher. Lake Lanato is the largest inland lake in the Philippines. It's about 20 miles long and can kick up quite a sea when the wind is right. We were out on the lake when the old motor stopped altogether and acted as if the gas line was plugged, like the old Model T Ford used to do at times. He took the line off, induced some trouble in pitching of the boat. I was bailing with half a coconut shell in a 5-gallon oil tin, all at the time trying to keep the boat headed into the wind. There was a bunch of rust, etc., in the line, then dropped a screw, and we lost a lot of time finding it again. We hooked up the line and started the motor again. Ran pretty well until we were in 5 or 6 kilometers of the farm. We could see the galvanized iron roofing in the distance, sloped altogether, and we tried paddling but could not make any headway against the wind. So we headed towards the shore and a Moro's house we saw at the water's edge. And that will be it for this one. Last page will be continued in part 3. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully you're enjoying the insights of this individual in the Philippines in 1936.